So hey there guys, Joel Hughes here from Glass Mountains. Now I wrote this blog post on a new Google initiative called Core Web Vitals. I thought I'd record a video as well just to give you a bit more background and insight into it. Now, I'd encourage you to read this post because it gives a very clear signal for Google as to what factors they are considering important in terms of ranking for websites going forward. Now, as you may or may not know, Google are constantly tweaking the algorithms which they use to help understand your website and understand what phrases it relies upon. And that's constantly in flux. But every once in a while, they release a major update where they've decided, oh, okay, now we're going to introduce this mechanic or that mechanic, and there's a big major change. Maybe they've been testing something and they've decided to roll it out. Well, this Core Web Vitals, it was due to be, it was due to be released later this year, but I think with COVID, etc., they've delayed it to 2021, which is good because it probably gives everyone a little more time to think about it. Now, what Google are doing here, let's take a step back a second. When Google first started, the situation in terms of how Google worked was fairly straightforward. In the sense that they analysed all the words on your page and they counted up the links to pages. So they had this thing called PageRank. So the algorithm itself wasn't massively complex. However, that's been evolved over time. Because when it first started, for instance, Google wouldn't understand that, say, web design, 2 words, and website design, with website 1 word, and design is another word, they wouldn't understand these concepts are related because it was basically just doing a blind character search. There's no real intelligence to it. Whereas if we roll forward now, they're much more aware using artificial intelligence and lots of different knowledge kind of schemes that web design and website design, these are linked concepts. The upshot of that is really important. It means we haven't got to panic too much and focus too much about, am I using this exact key phrase or key word? Yes, we have to be mindful that we're using phrases which are relevant to the audience. But I would contest people do that anyway when they write good quality content. But I think the old tactics of, oh, we need every variety of this word stuffed into a page, they're long gone now. Because Google have evolved how they rank a web page. In their terminology, Google have this concept called signals, where a signal, for instance, is a trait or something which a web page has got, which they think could be important. Signals could be the page title, the page URL, pages that link to it, whether it's on Wikipedia. So the list of signals goes on and on and on and on. And the last couple of years, they've introduced more signals in terms of, like, for instance, does the website work well on mobile? That came in a couple of years ago. Google obviously saw that more and more people were accessing information from their mobile phones, so that pages which didn't render well on mobile, they were penalised. Now, for companies like mine who were writing responsive websites for years, responsive is where the design flexes, depending on the viewport, whether that's tablet or iPhone, that didn't really make a lot of difference. But Google are constantly looking at how they can improve getting relevant information to people. So one thing that Google spotted was this. Yes, for instance, let's stay on the topic of mobile, for instance. Oh yes, the design now fits well within the little space for a phone, but they might notice that, but they haven't done a good job because the actual download of the page is is huge compared to what it needs to be. And Google are aware that yes, sometimes we're on Wi-Fi, but sometimes we might be out on data on a limited plan, and you don't want your mobile to be sat there trying to download huge amounts of images and videos when really you want to get to the content. So that gives you an idea of how Google are constantly evolving. So they're constantly grabbing more signals into how they measure websites. And Core Web Vitals is all about new signals which they're bringing in. And these signals are very much about user experience. Now, one trait I've seen in the last couple of years, especially with WordPress, and that's not a criticism of WordPress, it's just that WordPress makes this easier than some platforms, is that with WordPress, we can add on lots of plugins. We can add on Google Analytics. We can add on a Facebook Messenger chatter prompt. We can use services like Exit Intel so that if I move off the website, a big banner comes up, or I can use OptinMonster to show this, or I can use Hotjar to show a heat overlap, and the list goes on. We can constantly add scripts and plugins to the website which seem to add useful services. And from the perspective of the website owner, everything seems fine because I add the plugin in, I click refresh, and the functionality seems to work. Happy days. However, it's a bit more complex than that. I mean, actually, I realise I'm sharing the screen here, so I could actually show you something. If I dip into Inspect, and I click on Network, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to refresh this page, and what you're going to see is an overview for all the different resources which that page needs to call, needs to get from the web server or out there on the internet to make it draw. Because it isn't a single thing. There's the content on the page, there's the images, but don't forget there's all those scripts and widgets that if it's showing your Twitter widget, it's got to pull stuff from there. So let's just click refresh a second. Wow. Now that might surprise you. Look at all of those individual requests. Yeah? So it shows you that what looks fairly simple on the surface is actually a right old nest underneath it. And that nest gets bigger and more complex depending on the scripts and the plugins you put in there. Now, one of the elements of this post was showing what can go wrong sometimes. And there was like a little video here. I won't talk it through because it's all in the blog post, but there can easily be an issue when we have competing scripts or plugins which are affecting how that web page displays. And that can cause big problems for user experience. And Google are going to really start punishing websites which aren't switched on to that. I think the upshot of that is that we're going to have to be a lot clearer and a lot cleaner and more stringent with what scripts and stuff we put onto web page. I think the days of just chuck it on there, it seems to add value, what harm can it do, they're going to go now. Now we're doing a lot more web performance work, especially on WordPress because that's our chosen platform, even though web performance is not a WordPress specific issue. And as part of that process, we put the whole website under the microscope. We check out the hosting. Can we improve that? Yes, we look at the caching strategy, but we also look at what plugins and scripts is it running? Do we need all this stuff? And 99 times out of 100, that process of wheedling it back to the bare bones, that alone gives big performance boosts. So I think it's a good strategy, I mean, what Google are doing here is good. And I think it just gives me, as somebody who wants to make leaner websites which are focused on user experience, not throwing too much at users, not having too many pop-ups and stuff appearing just because apparently some stats say they do convert. Google are now going to punish websites where all of that functionality causes problems. Now, even if all that functionality knits together well, it still creates can create issues in terms of performance, in terms of the amount of stuff it's got to download and how long it takes to render. So I think if there's one takeaway from this, it would be, what can you do to your website to minimize the experience, but to minimize the load on the website, but to maximize the experience for the users? Do you have to have all those scripts and plugins running? How do we strip it back and make it leaner and more straightforward? I think the final story I think I'd leave with is this. I've been developing websites since they first came out. We use the phrase internet, but really when we're talking about websites, it's www, or the World Wide Web. And in my last year of university, when I did computing, that's when the World Wide Web came out. And it was only available on, we used to access it on Sun workstations, big, beautiful workstations with monochrome screens. I mean, that was in the late 90s. So I kind of fell into the web and really enjoyed it and stayed with it as a career. Now, an interesting thing that happened in the early years of the web, we would create all these lush web experiences, lots of videos, lots of graphics. Well, maybe not video back then, but very elaborate displays, even some wacky displays. And because as we all got onto better broadband speeds, moving beyond even the 56k dial-ups, remember the old routers? All of a sudden, when people started using mobile phones and things like that, we became aware that you had to be very, very careful in terms of what stuff lurks under the surface of the web page. We've already done the Google inspect, but if I view the source, this is all the code which helps run it. And we went from a stage of not worrying about anything that was chucked onto the web code into a stage where we're much more focused about, do we need this, and making it clean and making the code efficient. And I think this whole Core Web Vitals and the initiative from Google here, that's very much getting back to those roots. It's almost sort of, okay, let's be sensible now and let's bring back the content and bring back the programming techniques and the ways we deliver websites into best practices. And I think when that happens and it's aligned with SEO, a lot of businesses will take note. So as I mentioned, we've done quite a few web performance stuff. So if you need our help with that, please do shout out. I will blog again soon about some of the performance gains we've made on a recent website, which very much relates to the content I've talked about here. So hopefully you found that interesting. Please take a read of that blog post. If you've got any comments, I would love to hear from you. Thank you guys. Bye-bye now.